The Civic is almost done, just a couple final details left. One of those bigger ones is the chassis itself and all the remaining components. First of all, they were just cut out of the sprues, cleaned up a little bit here and there, and then I applied some primer. A couple light coats of primer later, some parts were painted flat black, others were painted silver, and some a combination of both. So in between, I just masked them off quickly to paint the other half in silver. The wheels also still needed to be painted, but those were resin parts from the USCP kit, so those were not primed with the Zero Paints primer, as that is for plastic, but primed with Tamiya primer, which is suitable for plastic, metal, and therefore also resin. The wheels needed to be painted in a chrome finish, and I decided to test it out with a base layer of Tamiya Lacquer Paints LP1. This is just a gloss black, which dries super quick and pretty glossy. And then on top I applied a light coat of liquid chrome from Molotow to simulate that chrome look. With one coat of chrome now applied, that was good enough. It had a nice glossy mirrory finish and it looked good to me. So I set those aside to dry for a couple of days and in the meantime move on to the chassis, which needed to be modified a little bit to fit the new lighting system to simulate the neon lighting to go underneath, across the front bumper, of course on the sides, and then through the wheel wells onto the rear section. In order to give it a bit more room, I removed some pieces from the side of the chassis. The front and rear had more than enough space. So in one of the earlier episodes on this build, I asked you guys to give me some help, hints, and suggestions on what to use for the neon, or at least to simulate the neon. Now, I myself am not really that good with electronics. I really am not good with electronics. Simply put, I suck when it comes to electronics, so I needed to have it as simple as possible. So I got multiple suggestions for different ways of doing LEDs, even some LED filament, which is a really good solution, but not something I'm willing to try at the moment. So maybe for another project in the future, I will go with those LED filaments, as I've seen a couple of videos, and I think I should be able to pull it off. But for the first one here, I wanted to keep it as simple as possible and also make it pretty explainable to you guys, as it is really simple to use. So one of the first suggestions that I got was actually to use EL wire. This is a really basic and simple solution. It comes with a small box with an on and off switch. You put in some batteries, attach the wire, and then you're pretty much set to go. You of course do need to route it where you want it. It's pretty pliable. It does need to be helped a bit in some areas. I just made some small relief cuts on some corners to make it easier to go around that corner. And then once you have the set length, just cut off the end and you're good. Of course, in the areas in between, I also glued it in place, and in the end I added some epoxy in a couple of spaces just to hold it there permanently. But overall, a really good simulated finish for the neon lights, which is pretty affordable and really easy to do. So I'm really happy that I gave this a shot. But for the next one, I might just have to up my game and give some actual electronics a shot. Some of the areas around the wheel wells, of course, don't need to be lit up, so those were glued in place and then painted black so the light doesn't show through. The main chassis on this kit isn't really all that detailed, as I think it's mainly focused on the race car version of these kits for the Hasegawa kit that I used as a base, therefore it doesn't really have all that many details. And to be honest, I wasn't really too fussed about the chassis, as I was more worried about the lighting and having that look good. So all the parts were just painted in their basic colors. Some of the parts were weathered a little bit with some Tamiya Panelline accent color, and then everything was easily assembled. So with the main chassis now finally assembled, that could then be glued in place as well. On the sides, of course, there was more than enough space. On the rear section, there was a pretty big piece of the chassis missing. I didn't really want to bother just putting a new section in there, as it won't be seen, and it will also help hide some of the wire for the neon lighting. And on the front, it did need to be adjusted a little bit. Some corners were cut and filed to fit around the neon, but in the end, it was perfectly fine. The tires were put onto the wheels, and then the wheels were put in place as well. So as far as ride height goes, I didn't adjust it whatsoever, as the cars in the movie had a pretty high ride height, and I think they weren't even lowered. So I didn't want to do that either, just to keep it as close to the movie look as possible, fill up the wheel wells nicely, and have that pretty much be it. Now, of course, the exhaust, or at least the muffler piece on this one, isn't what you want. And I've seen some of Craig Lieberman's videos where he explained the actual build of these Civics, and they simply just used a new muffler on the end, a cheap eBay unit, and that's pretty much it. So that's what I did, but then with a Streetblisters one, just cut the old one off and put the new one in place and have it at that. Now, of course, that was just a little bit too short, so I cut off some sprue from the actual kit itself to lengthen it and make it in the correct position. I gave it a quick lick of some silver paints and then blended it in with a bit of weathering from the Tamiya Panelline accent color, glued on the muffler, and that pretty much sums up this build. So overall, I'm really happy with the way that this build came out. I love that I did add the neon lighting. As a lot of you had suggested, I couldn't really do without it, so I kinda had to do it. Now in the end, this is not my best build in years, not even close, but I'm still really happy with the way that it came out and have another one for my Fast and Furious collection. Thank you to USCP for sending out their fantastic conversion kit and making me able to do this build, and of course Streetblisters for supplying the paint, and you guys for following along. Now let me know down in the comments below what you thought of this build and how you would tackle it your way, and I'll see you on the next one.